Our lives are about others, giving ourselves for those around us. It comes from the very essence of God's heart, bringing all types of people together under the banner of love, connecting them into a life that is far beyond what they knew possible, giving a helping hand and a friend for the future. There are so many longing for community and care, no matter their color or country. Christ came and gave his life for everybody. We will go to anyone, anywhere, and bring them the hope of Jesus. Everyone matters to God, so everyone matters to us.
Welcome to every location, wherever you are. We're so grateful that you're here for this message. I'm excited to be sharing this morning a message that God has put on our heart. We, a few weeks ago, and happening now in different parts of the world, we had The Cave, which is the once-a-year gathering of the Freedom Church family. People come from different places, and we look at whatever God has for us. And this year, we looked at some new DNA, some new characteristic personality traits that God's given to our church to help us understand who he's called us to be. And one of those was everyone matters. Everyone matters. And it was so powerful to receive this. We really believe that God is saying, Freedom Church, for the days ahead, you need to understand that everyone matters. Even more than you have till now, there's something of my heart within this that you need to take a hold of and put to work. So we thought we're going to spend some time looking at this. And I'm excited to be sharing a bit more with you today. Now, I thought it would be great. Since I moved to Uganda with my family a few months ago, and I was encouraged to be allowed back so soon, so quickly. Some of you are probably not encouraged by that. You thought, flipping out, we just got rid of him and he's back again. But here I am. And I've had lots of time, some quieter evenings, less people, less friends around to hang out with. No, I've got lots of friends out there. But I've been using my time to brush up on a few old skills. And so I thought, why don't we start today with a bit of a drawing? I thought, I'm going to draw them a picture, and then I'm going to take this picture, I'm going to hang it in my bedroom or somewhere precious in my house. So I was thinking, what could I draw a picture of? I'm going to draw a picture of Josh Snowsall today. Come on up here, Josh. Come and take this seat. Let me show you all my creative talents. Isn't he handsome? Isn't he handsome? You just wait until I capture him in my picture. People know that I'm a doodler. I'm a doodler. Yeah, look at me, Josh. It's fine. It's fine. The camera will capture your nice side. I'm a doodler. Wherever I'm in a meeting, I'm doodling away. And people are like, what are you drawing? And I'm like, I've got no idea. I'm just filling the page. So, should we begin? Come on, Josh. I'm sure there'll be some artists in the audience who are like, that is not how you start a portrait. But anyway, he's got a sort of a roundish head, hasn't he? Is that a good start? Maybe. And his hair kind of does this on it, which is pretty impressive. And it's a bit shorter here, and it's a bit shorter here. And what else is, he's got 2 ears, which is great. There we go. I think he has a lovely smile. So let's put that on there. There we are, Josh. There we are, his teeth in there, and he's got a couple of eyes, and some, There we go. What am I missing? I'm missing his nose. Let's get his nose on there. When you're drawing a picture of somebody, you need to take a close look at them. It all starts with a close consideration and inspection of the object that you're about to draw. He's got a neck going on here and some shirt in there. Should we leave it at that, Josh? Yeah. Is that good enough? Okay, wait there. Don't go anywhere. Because this is a question I want to ask you. This is my drawing of Josh. This is my capture of who he is. I want to ask you this question. Who would you rather meet with or go out and hang out with? Would you rather meet with my impression of Josh, or would you rather meet with the real deal? The real deal. I'm slightly hurt by that, but that's okay. I kind of get where you're coming from. Who would Rose rather take home with her today? Or, come on, Josh, come on in. The real deal. I'm guessing she'll say the real deal. I want this guy playing with my kids, not this guy. I won't let this guy anywhere near my kids, she'll probably say. Anyway, we want the real deal, don't we? The real thing. But here's the thing. I think when it comes to our relationship with Jesus, very often what we do is we draw a rough portrait, a pen portrait, almost like a cartoon impression of who he is. And we say, that'll do, I'll carry that around with me. Oh my goodness, I've taken the easel with me. I'll carry that around with me, and I'll keep that with me. You know, I'm going to put in the bits that I like, and there are a few bits and pieces that I don't fully understand, or maybe elements of who he is that I don't get, so I'm going to leave them out. And I'm going to hold on to this impression of Jesus. But something amazing happened. The Bible tells us that something amazing happened. Josh, you can go now. Thank you so much. Round of applause. The Bible tells us that something amazing happened when Jesus came and lived amongst us. It says this. It says, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling amongst us. The idea of who God was, the concept of who God was, the impression of who God was, stepped off the page, stepped out of the Word, out of the scriptures and the scrolls, and he came and he was amongst us, flesh and blood, you know, living, breathing, eating, the real deal. He came and he lived amongst us. And the reason I'm saying this today, because many people sat here, you may be a Christian, you may not be a Christian. You'll say, yeah, I get that Jesus came. But I think when he came, there was so much more to him than sometimes we realize. Such greater depth and complexity, elements to his personality, facets of who he was, that's kind of easy to miss out on and easy to lose. Now, I'll give you an example. You know, I will be reading my Bible sometimes, reading a story that I'm familiar with about Jesus. And I'll be like, yeah, I know this story. This is when Jesus, you know, rebukes the Pharisees, or he does. Hang on a sec. What did he just say? What did he just say? Jesus, meek and mild, you know, sheep under the one arm, staff in the other hand. The guy who was, you know, blonde hair, blue eyes in all the strange pictures that we have. He just stood up and he rebuked those guys with fire and fury. How do I apply this to my impression of Jesus? Where do I put it on the canvas? Sometimes it's awkward, sometimes it's sharp, sometimes it contradicts who I've understood him to be. There's elements of who Jesus is that we can so easily lose touch with and forget. And I believe, Freedom Church, and to anybody who's listening into this, today, Jesus wants to step into your life in a very real way. He wants to show you who he is in a very real way. You know, I think that we do an amazing thing in our church. We talk a lot about the power of the gospel. You know, that Jesus came, he lived amongst us. And when the time came, he went to the cross and he died on the cross. And through dying on the cross and taking our sin to the cross, he made a way for us to come back into relationship with God. That when we choose to make him our Lord and Savior, we can access this amazing life, this eternity. And we talk a lot about that, and that's amazing. But you know what? Jesus did more than just die for us and secure our future. He spent time here on earth. And in his time here on earth, he lived a life that was a demonstration of what he was calling each of his followers to, each of us to as his people. And sometimes I think we can say, well, I'm going to take the salvation bit, but the life bit, I mean, that's a little bit harder to absorb on the canvas. I'm not sure I want to carry that around and hang that in my home and take a hold of all that. But there's something about Jesus, you take one bite, you have to take the whole thing. I think there's a responsibility upon us to seek out the truth about who he was, the life he lived. So he lived this life. He did these things. You know, he loved, he cared, he was compassionate, he healed people. And he did it all in a tiny space of time. You know, when you think about it, when you just stop and think about who Jesus was, he arrived as a baby in a mother's arms, helpless, completely helpless. God humbled, helpless. And he grew up to be a child, and we read in the Bible that as a child he went to the temple, and he spent 3 days lost in the temple. He was so interested in what was happening in the temple. And then he grows up to be an adult, and at some point around the age of 30, his ministry, his public ministry begins. And that ministry lasted, some people say 2.5 years, some people say 3.5 years. It didn't last very long. It lasted less than Obama's second term. You know, his ministry, his public ministry, his notoriety, all that he did to change the world, he did in a space of time that was less than since the last Olympics. It's astonishing, isn't it? How much he managed to do. It says in the Bible, he did so much you couldn't capture it in books and on the pages of books. When the Lord stepped out of the Word and became flesh amongst us, he achieved so much around us. And then at some point around the age of 33, he went to the cross. Now, I'm 33 years old. And I would tell you, 33 is not an old age. it's a young age to end your life. That was the end of his ministry. But in that short space of time, there was something that he showed us. He demonstrated something for us. And we need to grab a hold of this, and we need to engage in this. And we need to say, you know what, Jesus, it's not just about the salvation that I take a hold of and some of the teachings and the good things. I need to walk the path you walked, follow the steps you followed. I need to allow you to put your fingerprints all over my life and make me like you. And when I'm looking at the Bible and I'm reading the stories of Jesus, pause for thought, there is something that always stands out to me as what I believe to be part of his mission when he was here amongst us. And it's kind of like a theme. It's a headline that we need to understand was part of why he came when he came, he lived when he lived, he died when he died. And it's this concept that everyone is made in the image of God, and so everyone matters. Everyone is made in the image of God, and so everyone matters. Jesus didn't draw lines around different groups of people. He walked straight through the barriers and through the obstacles. Who did he hang out with? The tax collectors, the sinners. He spent time in the temple preaching and teaching the word of God. He went to the houses he shouldn't have gone to. He hung out with his disciples. He crossed the lake and went to people groups that were not ready to accept him or didn't know what he was all about. He just tore through all these barriers, and he did it because he was showing us that everyone is made in the image of God, and so everyone matters. This is one of the first things that we learn about God, is that he made us all in his image. Reel your way back to the beginning of the Bible. One of the first things we learn is God says, let us make them in our own image. Let us place our fingerprints upon these people. These people, every one of them, they're going to reflect something of who I am. And that plays out through all of time. And Jesus comes along and he steps into a world saying, everyone is made in the image of God. Every person bears the imprint of God upon their life. And so each one is unique and valuable. It doesn't matter what they look like, what they believe, where they come from, who they even worship. They're still made in the image of God. And therefore everyone matters. And church, this was so at odds with the world that Jesus stepped into. Just stop. One of those dimensions to Jesus' character was the world that he was born into. He was born into Israel, that part of the world that was under Roman rule. And the Roman Empire, they did not believe this or teach this or subscribe to this way of thinking. It was a completely different worldview. In fact, Judaism was the only religion that saw everybody as made in the image of God. Every other belief system and religion said that there's God, and there's some people, kings and Caesars and emperors, who are gods themselves. But then there are a whole bunch of other people who are worthless and valueless. And God sits there on his throne and he looks at this world and he sees the consequences of this. What it meant is that some people were slaves. And what happened to slaves? They became the property of human masters. Some people were born with illness and disability. And the parents had the option of discarding them and throwing them away. People, depending upon their gender, were considered either people who could rule and have authority and make decision, or women who were seen as something to be owned by a man and to have no influence and no power. And Jesus arrives in the middle of all of this. He arrives. God says there's something about this world that's not right. They've forgotten how we made the world. They've forgotten how we wanted it to be. And so Jesus comes along and he says, I'm going to tear up this stupid system, these silly rules. It doesn't reflect the heart of my Father. It's not how the world should be. And he starts breaking the rules and changing the rules and making people see the world in a very different way. And here's the amazing thing about Jesus. He wasn't born in Rome in the center of the world. He wasn't born into a seat of human power or authority. He never went to university and got some kind of degree or doctorate. He never wrote a book. What we read about him, it's other people's impressions of him and other people's capturing of his ministry. He was just a simple carpenter that came and lived amongst us. Yet the world that he stepped into was changed by him forever. Think about your life right now. How do you track time in your world? We're in 2016. 2016 what? 2016 years since he walked on this planet. You may not know this, but you probably received a good education. Education, university, college, school was born out of the belief that people needed, because they were made in the image of God, they needed to be trained and equipped. It was born out of Jesus' teaching. Maybe you've been sick at some point in your life and you've gone to a hospital and received care. Do you know where hospitals came from? They were born out of the ministry and the teaching of Jesus. Because he said, because people are made in the image of God, they deserve to be looked after. And so it was the church that pioneered education. It was the church that pioneered hospitals and healthcare. It was the church that pioneered things like places for people who were very sick, hospices to be created, or orphanages to be set up. The church did all these things. And historians, secular historians, who may or may not believe in the claim that Jesus was the Messiah, when they look at history, they say the world changed. It hinged upon the short-lived ministry of a carpenter who lived in this inconsequential part of the world, taught some stuff and then died, and should have, by all rights, have finished and ended at that point. But it didn't stop there. It just began to get started with his death. And the ripple effects of Jesus' ministry, the ripple effects of his heart, the ripple effects of his teaching have gone on to change the whole world, and they're still changing the world today. And that's a great thing. You know, when I think about the difference that Jesus made to the world, is Jesus arrived in a world that was all about I, us, and them. Let me explain this. There's two dimensions to this. It was a world that was all about I, us, and them. In the world that Jesus arrived in, the belief was you protect yourself first. You look after yourself first. You're the most important thing in your life, and so you need to push yourself forward, get yourself ahead, prioritize your needs and your desires, make yourself the main thing in your life. That's what people believe. That's how people lived their lives. And then Jesus came along and he started to question this. You know, the Pharisees tried to catch Jesus out by sending a scholar to question him on his theology. And the scholar said to Jesus, "What's the greatest commandments?" And Jesus said, "It's simple. You should love God with all that you are, and you should love your neighbor as yourself." It's as simple as that. Love God with everything you've got and love your neighbor as yourself. Don't put yourself first. Think about your neighbor instead. And in the world that Jesus was born into, the us was my friends. So I'm the most important thing and I go first, but then I look after the people that I like. I draw a line around the group of people that get me and like me and love me. Maybe they're of the same social standing as me. Maybe they're of the same importance of me. Maybe they're people that have supported me in the past and helped me get ahead. And those were the people that were loved in people's lives. But then there was a whole bunch of other people, the them. And in the world that Jesus was born into, in the world that Jesus lived into, the them were a people that you could despise and that you could hate. You know, they've done archaeological digs in places like Bath in England, and they found tons and loads and loads and loads of tablets that they call the curse tablets. Because what people would do in the world that Jesus lived in is if they disliked somebody, they would go to a temple and they would have a curse inscribed on a piece of rock. A curse written out, a curse against your enemies, a curse against those that were disliked. You know, and they would pile these things up, and their objective would be to see their competitors torn down, those that sat outside of the circle of the people that they liked, torn down. And what did Jesus say? He said, love God and love your neighbor. It's not about I and us, it's about we. But more than that, I don't just want you to love the people that you like. I want you to love your enemies as well. You don't curse your enemies, you pray for them. You pray for those who persecute you. He said those lines that you've been drawing around people groups and around different ethnic groups and around different gender groups and around different nationalities and around different ways of life, I want you to get rid of those lines. And I want everybody to be part of the we that we all love. Because everyone is made in the image of God and everyone matters. That's one dimension of it. But there's another way that it works out as well, and I've already touched on it. In the world that Jesus was born into, in the world that Jesus lived in, people were ranked in different ways according to their social status, according to what was perceived as their importance, according to what they could give and what they could contribute to society. And right at the top of the hierarchy, you had God or the gods. No, they were right up there. And then you had the Caesars and the kings. You had Caesar himself. You had King Herod and other kings that appeared who were considered, there was something of God in these men. And then it worked its way right the way down. We know that the Romans, for example, Roman citizens had rights that non-Romans didn't. Remember that Paul said he appeals to Caesar And he's afforded a different level of protection, a different level of privilege and right because he's a Roman citizen. And this hierarchy goes all the way down. And right at the bottom of this hierarchy, you have people like children and the disabled and slaves and women, people pushed down who are believed to be the property of others, dependents, nothing to contribute, a weight upon society. And Jesus stepped into that, and Jesus said, this is not how it should be. Everyone is made in the image of God, and therefore everyone matters. And so what did Jesus do? He said to Martha, Martha, get out of the kitchen. For years, haven't we? We've been teaching people. Martha, she liked to work a little bit too much and didn't appreciate Jesus, and Jesus called her out on it and said, come out of the kitchen. Nobody in the early generations of the church would have read that story that way. What they would have seen is they would have seen Martha, who was confined to the kitchen, Martha, who was locked out of the circle, Martha, who couldn't access the feet of Christ, doing what she was required to do, operating in the place that she was required to operate in. And Jesus said, I'm calling you out of that place. Just because you've been told that's how it is, that's not how it's going to be anymore. I want you to come out and sit at my feet. You're an equal. You're made in the image of God. And because you're made in the image of God, you matter as much as anybody else. He did it with Martha. And he did it with some other groups as well. And I want us to think today about what Jesus did for kids, what Jesus did for children, how Jesus changed the world for children. Because, I love my kids to bits. There's nothing I would not do for my kids. And I can think, every parent has that feeling towards their child, or that's something that's always been apparent in the world. It's not. Sadly, it's not today. But as you roll back time and go into history, you start to realize how little people thought of children. And so we're going to have a look at a scripture here, and it's a scripture from Luke 9 verses 46 to 48. And this is what it says. It says, an argument started amongst the disciples as to which of them would be the greatest. You can just picture the scene, can't you? These disciples, once again, putting their feet in it, Jesus watching, oh my goodness, what's wrong with you guys? They're having an argument amongst which of them will be the greatest. Well, comparing themselves to each other. Maybe he's going to be the greatest because he can lead worship so well. Or, maybe it's Judas because he's the finance guy. He can do all the counting. Maybe he'll be the greatest. Well, Peter, there's something charismatic about him. Maybe it'll be him who's the greatest. They're sat there thinking and comparing themselves to one another. An argument starts to break out. Jesus, knowing their thoughts, took a little child and had him stand beside him. Jesus, knowing what they were thinking, stepped outside of their mindset and grabbed a hold of a child who was right at the bottom of the food chain. And he brought him and he stood him next to him in the place of honor. And this is what he said. He said to them, whoever welcomes this little child in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. For it is the one who is the least amongst you who is the greatest. It's not the guys up there who are the greatest. It's not the people with all the status and all the wealth and all the influence and all the image. It's not those guys. We work our way right the way down to the dregs of society. The rejected, the neglected, the left behind, the left alone, the forgotten. These are the greatest. Jesus says, stop thinking of your position and your power and your influence and all that will make you great, and recognize it's these kids, these precious little ones. And he puts one next to him. And it's an amazing picture, because there was another time in the Bible, wasn't there, when the disciples saw people bringing the children to Jesus, and the disciples thought, what are they doing bringing these worthless kids to Jesus? He's got far more important things to be doing. Jesus rebukes them and says, let the little children come to me. Unless you're like them, you won't get into heaven. Unless you make yourself like these children, you won't get to inherit God's kingdom. Jesus turning the whole thing upside down, messing up the image that the disciples had, messing up the view of the world. And we would look at this stuff and we would like to say the world is somehow different now. And yes, we've moved on and we've been impacted by the teaching of Jesus. But I also think it's a challenge to all of us, because I think I draw lines around groups of people. And I say, I need to make sure that me and my family are okay and that we're going first. And then there's my friends and the kind of the in crowd from my perspective, the guys I like hanging out with. I want to spend some time with them. And then next to the people, I don't know them so well, but I'd like some time with them. And then in the far reaches, there's the people that have hurt me and upset me and offended me. And I'm like, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I want to spend so much time with them. I think I'm just going to leave them somewhere down there and they can kind of take care of themselves. And Jesus says, no, the lines, the divisions are removed. And it's one body. We're all made in the image of God. Whoever welcomes this little child in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. This child is made in the image of God. There's something of God's fingerprints upon this little child. So when you welcome the little child, it shows what you think of me. And it shows what you think of my Father. You know, when you discard and set aside the needs of this little one, you're discarding and setting aside my needs. There's a story, isn't there, that Jesus tells in another part of the Bible where he says to the gathered crowd, you know, whatever you did for the least of these, you did unto me. And James writes in the New Testament, he says, don't accord honor and special position and privilege to the people of power and influence. Instead, treat everyone the same. Rub out the lines, the divisions, the dividers. You know, what does this mean for us, church? You know, what does it mean for how we treat that guy at work who's a complete goon and who's rude to us, or that person in the playground that's been bullying us for years and making our life hell? It's provocative, isn't it? Because we want to leave them at arm's length and have nothing to do with them. But Jesus, the real Jesus who walked amongst us, says you need to pray for and make them your friend. They especially need your love. The least they need your love. And it goes to knock on about how we think about people in society. You know, who are we prioritizing in our societies? Who do we have suspicion and fear and concern about? You know, when we hear about all these refugees washing up on the shores of the Mediterranean and we think, man, this is a mess. I'm just going to turn over the page and read the next story, or I'm going to flick to the next article on the internet. Whatever you do for the least of these, you do unto me. How you treat them reflects how you see me and how you see my Father. Hey, it's challenging, right? It's challenging teaching. Should we take it one step further? You know, what about those crazy, deluded people that wander around, believe different things and want to kill us? How do we treat them? How would Jesus treat them? You know, it's controversial. Whatever you do for the least, the most unliked, however you view them and treat them, there's something of us how we see God, because everyone is made in the image of God, and therefore everyone matters in some way. It's provocative. It's provocative for all of us. And one of the things that I've noticed about myself is I do like to draw lines around different groups of people. I'll be honest with you. Some people I find more palatable than others. Some I find easier to love than others. I like to do that. But I also have a tendency, you know, I'll go out and I'll say to my kids, just be quiet, okay? Just don't say anything. It would be better for you not to be heard in this event. You know, I just wonder sometimes what that says about my heart and how I view them. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't discipline our kids. I'm not saying we shouldn't deal properly and well with people who mean harm to us. But I'm saying there's something about our hearts as a church. We are the hands and feet of Jesus in this generation, and how we view people and treat people, it reflects how we see Jesus and how we view God himself. You know, Jesus diagnosed the issue where people were struggling with these belief systems and struggling with these things that he was teaching. He diagnosed the problem within them. And I've pulled out an example of where he did it, and it comes up a number of times in God's word. But there was this one situation where Jesus rocked up at the synagogue he rocked up at the temple. He rocked up at the temple for some teaching and for a service, for an event, and the temple's full of people. And within the temple, there's a man, and the Bible says he was a man with a withered hand. And it says that the man with the withered hand was in the audience and probably watching what was going on. And everybody was sat there wondering what Jesus was going to do. Would he break the customs, rules, and traditions? Would he go against the expectations and the way it was done to heal this man? Or would he just stick with tradition and convention? And it was one of those moments where Jesus messes up the picture. You know, one of those awkward moments where Jesus, you know, rather than just saying, maybe I'll heal him in cafe after over a coffee. Maybe I'll catch him on the way out of the church and just deal with it. Jesus didn't do that. Jesus said to the man with the withered hand, hey, you stand up. You know, let's get all eyes off me and let's get all eyes on you instead. And he said to the people gathered, knowing what they were thinking, what's the right thing to do? Do we leave him to it and let him suffer? Is that the right thing to do because of the rules and the expectations and the conventions? Or do we heal him instead? And this is what it says. It says, Jesus looked around at them angrily in this moment, and he was deeply saddened by their hard hearts. By their hard hearts. You just imagine Jesus, the real deal, flesh and blood, stood there in this moment going, man, this man's in need. You know, he matters so much. There's something of God within this man. He has value and worth, and he's suffering. But rather than see him healed and come alive, we'd rather stick with our customs and our comforts and our traditions and our conventions. And Jesus was angry and deeply saddened by their hard hearts. The root issue was hardness of heart. And I can relate to this as well. I don't know about you, but there's something about this world and surviving in this world that can harden our hearts. You know, a great story, Naomi and I, about a month ago, were driving home in Kampala, and we saw this man, and he looked, to be honest, he looked crazy. I mean, he looked crazy, and he was a mess, and he was wandering along, and he was shouting at some kids, and Naomi said, man, it looks like he's got nothing. So Naomi, being compassionate, jumped out of the car with some food and went and took it to him and said, I'd really like to bless you with this. And this guy unleashes a tirade of abuse at Naomi. And I can see her standing there for 1 minute, and in the end, she just gets the and leaves him to it and gets back in the car. Drive off, let's just leave him. You know, sometimes what happens to us in the world can harden our hearts. Sometimes the experiences we go through, maybe even the experiences in church, can harden our hearts. Maybe we're in jobs and roles and have responsibilities that cause us to harden our hearts. But there's something about that Jesus says they need to soften their hearts. They need to soften their hearts and see the need and be moved by the need and remember that everyone matters. When they read in the Telegraph about the refugees in I don't know, some part of South Europe, they need to soften their hearts and recognize that they need to care for these people. Or they read about trouble in their neighborhood, in the rough side of town where people are having issues, rather than stay away from that rough part of town. They need to soften their hearts. The hard hearts need to be softened. They need to go after it. The reason that I'm sharing all of this with you is I just want to build a foundation of who Jesus was and what he did, not just what he achieved and purchased for us, but the life that he lived and the uncomfortable nature of the life that he lives and the way it messes up our pen portrait of him, and it requires us to do some stuff. And the reason I'm sharing it as well is because there was this situation in my life in 2012 where Jesus stepped into my comfortable existence. He stepped into my family situation. And he said, it's great, you know, what you're doing for your family, but you seem to have missed the bigger picture. There are some other people that you need to be aware of as well. And so, and it all happened in a dream. I know it sounds strange. Maybe some of you are comfortable with this. Some of you find this unfamiliar. I had a dream this evening, and this dream messed me up. Messed up my life. And I was like, how on earth am I going to share this with Freedom Church, this dream? And so we've made a video of the dream for you to see. So it's the first thing we've ever produced out of Africa Hub, but it's our first creative video. And I would love to show you this video now. And we've made this video, and we've written a story about what God did in this dream in my life. So we're going to watch it on the big screen. If you just turn your eyes to the big screen.
Laughter, happiness, joy, delight. These are the makings of childhood, right? Getting to live in a colorful world, protected and comfortable. No fear, no fright. Am I describing a dream? No, for our kids, this is life. But what would you do if I were to say that many children don't live this way? I know this to be true because one night I had a dream where God took a child of mine and he placed her in a nightmare scene. My precious daughter, my Eve, she was alone and upset. She was living on the rubbish tip, a vision of neglect. Who would allow this to happen? Her young life wasting away, all of the promise and all the potential lost in a world that smelt of decay. Gone were my hopes, wishes and ambitions. Instead, there were 2 pieces of plastic that she climbed between that night. Can you imagine this sight? Everything we plan, spend, and do for our kids, we're busy making life great for them, and that's good. Isn't that how they should live? But we should also remember that my nightmare is real for some other children in some other places, and their lives are valuable too. As I woke from this dream, this impossible vision, I heard a voice speak a line that I cannot forget. He said something simple, yet painfully undeniable. He said, "No, they're not your kids, but they are mine. They live on the streets and they're basically alone. There are tens of millions of children out there with no home. Why don't we dream a little longer, or just accept for 1 minute? If we really tried, if we really wanted, we could see this finished."
It's a bit of a weeper, right? But I had this dream this night, and I woke up from this dream, and I said, "Oh, Naomi, oh my goodness, just had this nightmare." And as I reflected on this dream, I was like, "God, you were trying to say something to me through this dream. You were trying to speak to me." I remember every evening putting my kids to bed and tucking them up in their beds and pulling down the mosquito net and thinking, "Lord, protect my babies tonight." And he did every single night. He looked after them. But it was like in this dream, God was saying to me, you care so much for your kids, and that's a great thing. But there are some other kids out there that have got nobody to look out for them or to look after them. And it was like he was saying to me, you've got the kind of in crowd, your family and your friends, and they're all fine. But beyond the boundaries of that crowd, there are some people that have been forgotten, some children that have been forgotten. And it was like he was saying to me, there's the ranking and the social standing, and you're somewhere here, but right at the bottom in the shadows, there are these kids, and they've been forgotten about, forgotten by people, but not forgotten by their father. Because how could he forget his kids? Now, how could I forget my kids? I don't just forget one night, I forgot last night that I should have put the kids to bed and had to sort it out themselves. I never do that. We never do that as parents. And God never forgets about his kids. I had this dream, and as I was starting to prepare for this message, I started thinking about this message a number of months ago. And as I was beginning to prepare for this message, I started reading a book all about who Jesus really was and the world that he lived in. And I got onto a chapter that was all about the way kids were treated in the world that Jesus lived in. And then I got to this page, and it said, if a parent had a child that was sick, or was unplanned, or was illegitimate, or wasn't, the boy they wanted or the girl they wanted, it was enshrined within law when Jesus lived that they could take that child and they could place the child on the rubbish tip and leave the child there and let the child die of exposure. And when I read this, I was like, oh my goodness, God, you're speaking to me again. You're reinforcing this message. Well, a few months after I had this message, I went to a couple in Freedom Church in Kampala who were running a Street Kids project. And I said to them, how can I need to do something in all of this. What can I do to help? And a conversation began. And then a number of months later, they came to us and they said, we need to return back to the UK now, and we're going to shut this Street Kids project down. This project was doing amazing work, caring for kids on the streets, providing a home to kids, helping educate them. They said, we're going to shut it down unless you as a church want to take on this project. We prayed about it as a leadership team, and we were like, what do we do here? There's the opportunity to serve, but there's a responsibility that comes with it. We said it's a no-brainer. I remembered the dream that I'd had. And it's like God was saying, these kids are your kids, they're my kids, and they bear the imprint of me upon them. Every one of them matters so much to me. And so for the last few years, we've been building Freedom Heroes, as we called it. And we've been working to care for. We've got amazing teams in Kampala, in Uganda, and in Siem Reap in Cambodia who are doing an amazing work caring for kids. And in Kampala, it's still a Street Kids project. And I wanted to share with you today some of the happy and amazing stories of how we've been able to change the lives of some kids in Kampala. The first one I want to tell you about is this young man here called Sam. Now, Sam found himself in the position that his parents separated And when his parents separated, nobody wanted to look after Sam. And so Sam bumped around with different members of the family, and it became very clear that he landed with a grandfather who loved him very much, but his grandfather was old and had no means to take care of him. And Sam realized that he wasn't getting educated, and it became apparent very quickly to him that life was not going to be great in this set of circumstances. And so he decided to launch out on his own. And so he ran away, and he ran to Kampala, where he lived on the streets for over a year. You know, the streets of Kampala are not a happy place to live. I've been out at night in Kampala, and we've walked past shop doors where you'll see 5 or 6 boys like Sam huddled together, kind of spooning together to try and stay warm at night. And that was the reality of life for Sam for a while. But you know, Sam came along one Sunday afternoon to our Sunday program where we care for kids. We put on a program where kids can just come in off the streets, and they get to have some warm food, and they get some medical treatment if they need it, and they get to know volunteers within our team who have fun with them and chat to them and get to know them. And from that place, Sam started coming along to our Tuesday and Thursday street school, where we teach things like maths and English and basic things like this to try and help equip the children and to build a relationship with them, to get to know them a bit. And Sam came along to that. And in the end, we said, Sam is consistent and wanting a different life now. So we moved Sam into the home that we have for boys like Sam. And he got to live there for a while. And what we've done since then is we've put Sam into a school, and we've covered the cost of his school fees. And we've reconnected him with his grandfather. So he's able to live at home with his grandfather now. And he's able to go to school and get a good education. And his whole life has changed because of the work that Heroes has been doing. And I'm sharing this with you because the reason that we're able to do this is because some amazingly generous people in our church give into Heroes and make this possible. So that's Sam's story. Another one, this little chap here is called Museveni. That's actually the name of the president, but I can't say his real name, and everybody calls him Museveni, so I'm going to call him Museveni in this situation as well. Now, Museveni's found himself in a similar position to Sam in that his parents separated, and his dad, who took responsibility, took him along to a woman who was like a stepmother, and gave Museveni to this stepmom and said, you need to look after him. But she had her own kids who she could barely afford to raise. And so she called the dad up after a short while and said, you need to come and take responsibility for your son. So he went and he took the son off this woman. He placed him with another woman. And that woman didn't like didn't like Museveni and wasn't interested in looking after him, and so made his life merry hell for a period of time. And so Museveni decided at the age of 9 that he was going to escape that situation, and he went and lived out on the streets. Now, if Kampala's not a happy place for a 12, 13-year-old, it's not a happy place for a 9-year-old either. And he stayed out there for a number of years, and again, he connected into our Sunday program. And he came along to street school, and he moved into the boys' home. And he's living at the boys' home now, where there's a rehabilitation and a care program going on to help him, get used to normal life again, and to help him live a normal life again. And again, our team have been able to take him and reconnect him with that stepmother who loved him and who cared for him. And the day they rocked up with him, she was overjoyed, because she didn't know what had happened to him. He'd been taken away, and she'd searched for him and couldn't find him. And then one day our team arrived back with him, and she said, I will look after him. And he said, well, if you'll look after him, we'll pay his school fees so that he has opportunity in life to make life easier. It's an amazing story, right? Amazing work that we get to do, because God said to us, you need to care for these kids. I'm giving them to your church to take responsibility for them. And then a final story I wanted to share with you. This guy, he's called Tom. And Tom had a very sad set of circumstances. His dad was a soldier, and he went out to watch the football match. There was a Brazil match a few years ago in Kampala, and he went out to watch the football. On the way home from the football match, his dad was drunk, and he got beaten, and he died. And then his mother died of AIDS, and so he was left with no parents to look after him. And he bounced around different members of his family, and again, eventually he found his way onto the streets. The streets were seemed to him a better option than bouncing around from different members of his family who didn't love him and didn't want him. And again, the story is that he came to be part of the program, and he was cared for, and he was given a place to call home. And we put him in school, and for the last 2 years, he's been at the top of his class. His teachers say to us that he is one of the smartest boys that they've ever had in the school. You know what humbles me about this is he said since he arrived, I want to be a doctor when I grow up. And people are saying, this dream is a possibility. This dream is a possibility because he is a super smart kid. You know, and I just think about all of that promise and all of that potential that was just wasting away on the streets. But God saw it. And God said, you know, I've got this thing and it's called the church. And the church is there to be my hands and feet to care for these boys. And that's what we get to do as a church. And right now there are something like 27 boys that we have in school. And there are up to 60, 70, 80 that come along on a Sunday, a smaller number of them part of our street school. And we just try to be the hands and feet of Christ, caring for these kids, loving on these kids. And I wanted to share this with you because I think it's a fruit of what we're doing as a church that we don't shout about a lot. But it's amazing the way that Jesus is changing lives through what we're doing within Heroes. And I wanted to share it with you as well to say thank you to everybody who's giving into this and making this life change possible. And we've had people who've had tattoos, people that have done crazy things, run marathons, people that commit each month to give money into Heroes so that we can do this. But I also wanted to share with you that each month when it comes to sending the money to these projects, Jez, who oversees our finance, and myself, we sit there and we're like, where are we going to get the money from this month to do it? Because there is so much need. And we've taken on more boys at times than we can afford to look after, but we've just felt we can't say no to this young boy. You know, the opportunity arises and we say, yes, we'll act and we'll cut the cloth some other way to make it possible. And I wanted to share this with you, church, to let you know the amazing things that God is doing in these projects. But also to say to you, if you are in a position to help us with this, then please help us with this. Because as I said in that video, there are tens of millions of kids all over the world who don't have homes right now and live on the streets. And I think in the future, God is going to say to us, reach deeper, reach further, pull them in and to yourself. Be me. They're precious. They matter. And I've got a future and a vision for their life. And so if you're interested in supporting what we're doing for these children, you can go to freedomheroes.cc, and there are donate now buttons all over that website, everywhere on that website. And if you want any more information on Freedom Heroes, go to Next Steps, and they can either answer your questions or put you in touch with us to help you know more about what we're doing. Thank you so much, church, for your love and for your commitment to this project. And please think about partnering with us so we can do more of this in the future. Amen? Amen. Amen.